Now we've got the co-founder and president of Run for Something, Amanda Litman. Amanda, thanks for joining me again.
Thanks, Brian, for having me.
So I'm really excited to talk to you today because a lot of the prospect of building up our bench is very much in the zeitgeist right now. So first off, I know you have some good news about what the future of democratic or progressive politics is going to look like. So I'm going to give you the floor on that.
So I am so excited because just this morning we hit a really amazing milestone. Since the election, more than 20,000 people, mostly folks under 40, a majority women, have reached out to Run for Something to say they want to run for state or local office, and 7,000 of them just since inauguration. And to put that in context, in all of 2017, the first year Run for Something is around, the first year of the resistance, 15,000 people raised their hands. We have already exceeded that number just in a little over 3 months.
So that's interesting because I think the sense that a lot of us are getting is that there is a general theme of exhaustion and that people aren't as bought in, aren't as committed to resisting the Trump administration as we saw the first time around. I mean, we had seen, hundreds of thousands of people take to the streets in the women's marches across the country. We haven't had that same kind of popular uprising, but are you saying that basically behind the scenes that you're seeing even more interest in pushing back by virtue of running than even we saw during the first administration?
100%. I think people are really looking for something specific, tactical, local to do. We saw in the first Trump administration, there are certainly places and ways to use protests to move the issue forward, to drive the conversation. And I expect in the next couple months, we will see more protests as Trump and Elon do more horrific things. But I am so inspired by the fact that people are looking at what's going on around us and saying, you know what? I deserve to be in leadership. I deserve to have a seat at the table. And if the Democrats, especially right now, if the Democrats in office aren't going to fight for me, I'm going to fight myself. And I think that, to me, is why we're seeing so many people signing up to run.
Now, you had mentioned that the majority of these people are under 40 years old. Is that correct?
That's right.
So that obviously brings into focus the gerontocracy problem that we have on the left. How are you looking at, for example, the Jerry Connolly AOC intra-party battle, where AOC, arguably, whether you are progressive or not, it's hard to argue that there is no messenger who can grab attention in this attention economy in a more effective way than she can, and yet we opted for somebody who is 74 years old to retain the top spot on arguably the most important committee, the Oversight Committee in Congress. And so, what was your reaction to that move by the Democrats?
Oh, just deep disappointment.
Yeah.
I interned for Jerry Connolly when I was in college. He was my member of Congress. I worked in his Hill office. He's a lovely guy.
Right.
He is not the leader we need in this moment. He is not capable of wielding attention, of having the stomach nor the skills to actually fight. And I think it is so classically Democratic Party, and in particular, Democrats in Congress, to, say the 74-year-old, it's his turn now.
Right. As if it's a question of what we owe him as opposed to what he owes the movement that he's supposed to be working for more broadly. And if you can be more helpful to the movement by making way for somebody who is a more effective communicator, who can more effectively garner attention, again, in an attention economy, then that should be more important than feeling like we owe somebody something, even if it's to the detriment of the movement more broadly, that he has to get that because he put in his time.
I think it's not just Jerry Connolly. We see this over and over and over again. It has taken years to get some of these 70 and 80-year-olds to say it's time to step aside. We saw this with Dianne Feinstein. We saw this with RBG.
Right.
We saw this with Joe Biden. There is a point in which your value above any other Democratic replacement, there's that stat in baseball, your value above replacement player, your value above any other value, replacement Democrat from your district or your state, is just not high enough to warrant you holding on that seat. And in this moment, in this particular moment, it is so abundantly clear that the generation of leaders, both Democratic electeds and also candidly operatives who got us to this point, they can't get us to the next one. They don't have it in them. And it's not their fault. It's nothing personal, but it is such a moment for the next generation to step up and lead us forward. But they can't do that if the folks who hold those seats aren't going to step aside.
And by the way, if it's an ego question, like these people don't want to lose their relevance, they don't want to lose their money, their power, whatever it is, if it's an ego question, look at the ways in which Joe Biden's reputation suffered as a result of this election. Look at the ways in which RBG's reputation suffered by virtue of, well, I mean, it was a little bit of a different situation, but not stepping down before Trump took office. Look at the way that Feinstein's reputation suffered by virtue of staying there. Some of these older members who've made names for themselves by being bulwarks against overreach by the right or champions for whatever causes they were fighting for, they actually do more harm to themselves than good, and they chip away at their own reputation because the last thing that they're remembered for is the fact that they wouldn't step aside.
And we've just seen in the last 2 weeks, examples of the other way to do it. We saw Gary Peters, the senator from Michigan, say, you know what? It's time for me to retire. I'm gonna move on and make room for the next generation of leaders in Michigan. And we've seen Tina Smith,
Right.
an amazing, aggressive, progressive fighter out of Minnesota, say, you know what, I'm ready to spend time with my family. Both of them are in their mid 60s, relatively like spring chickens for the United States Senate. And both of them are opening the door to incredible new leaders. There's so many amazing people in both states and countless other places across the country who can now run and can redefine what the Democratic Party means in those places for everyone. This is such an incredible opportunity for especially, I think, leaders over the age of 70 to say, let me go out with dignity and grace. Let me end my term as a fighter who is not beholden to electoral problems, and to be seen as a generational torchbearer to really, I think it's a good deed in many ways to empower the next generation of leaders. But they got to step aside to do it. And I think one of our tasks as folks on the outside is to not be afraid to call them out when they're holding on for too long. It's not leadership, it's obstructionism.
And what do you say to the electorate more broadly, who, for example, sees somebody like Bernie Sanders and says, well, look, Bernie is one of the most effective messengers we have in the Democratic Party. It would be a shame to lose somebody like that who's built up so much goodwill, and built up his brand to the point where somebody like that being in the Senate is beneficial. And so how do you kind of reconcile it where it's not necessarily across the board, because there are some folks who are kind of at their prime even at their old age?
Even Bernie, he's in his mid 80s. He just ran for a 6-year term. You don't think there's anyone else in Vermont who could represent the people of Vermont just as well, and that he couldn't be just as powerful as a messenger on the outside, as an elder statesman for the movement that he leads, maybe without being beholden to having to be in DC all the time to do votes and participate in the back and forth of the Senate? I refuse to believe that he's the only capable fighter from the state of Vermont that could hold that office. I feel the same way about Elizabeth Warren, whom I love and is incredible. There are amazing leaders in Massachusetts who could also run, win, and hold that seat and do just as much good. And I'm not saying put these folks out to pasture. I'm saying that there is roles for them outside the United States Senate. Everyone, and I get called an ageist on the internet a lot. I hear that. Fine. Everyone is entitled to age with dignity and grace. No one is entitled to age as one of the most powerful people in the United States, which is what, if you're a member of Congress, you are. You have a responsibility to more than just your ego. You have a responsibility to the American people and to the community you represent. And that means sometimes stepping aside.
Amanda, how do you think about this in terms of Democrats having lost young men, for example? I mean, for the first time since I've been involved in politics, we've seen the youngest generation, 18 to 29-year-olds. We've lost young men. I believe it was 56 to 42 in the last election cycle. And do you think that the fact that we do have folks who are the youngest people in this country right now who are not resonating with a party whose leadership is largely septuagenarians and octogenarians?
I think it's a huge part of it. I also think about where the media places. I mean, this, you've talked so much and had so many really interesting conversations about the media ecosystem that Democrats are working in.
Yeah.
We have a ton of elected leaders who could not show up in those places, even if they wanted to, because they couldn't have a real conversation. They couldn't be a genuine, authentic person because they didn't grow up on the internet. They don't know a public persona that is not totally talking points and robot. It is really hard to do if you're not fluent in it. And I think one of the reasons that Run for Something candidates have been so effective at building up online followings, you see New York City Councilmember Chi Osei, you see Texas Representative James Tallarico, State Rep Anna Eskamani, Megan Hunt out in Nebraska, so many others who have really, engaged folks where they are. It's because they understand how this stuff works and they're normal people who happen to be doing a really extraordinary thing of serving their communities. But first and foremost, they're normal people. So when I think about how we're going to win back some of Gen Z, part of it is showing that government can deliver for them, especially in the local level, things like housing, transportation, childcare, student loans, and education and the like. But it's also giving them candidates that they can like and get to know in the places where they're consuming information. And that, I think, is the whole point of what Run for Something does in our work to reach young voters.
So for folks who are watching right now, how can we best help Run for Something in your efforts moving forward? Because this largely does compose. I mean, the right has been really effective at building up their bench and getting these people into office. You are largely the tool that we have, the vehicle to get these young progressive electeds into the system that then serve as folks who are going to be on our bench to get into Congress, get into the Senate. Can you talk a little bit about some of the success you've had with your alumni and then also how we can help?
Yeah, Jasmine Crockett, representative from Texas, started as a state representative, came through the Run for Something pipeline. Suha Subramanyam, who's currently a member of Congress from Virginia, came through our pipeline. Yadira Caraveo, who served in the last Congress, was amazing. Sarah McBride from Delaware came through the Run for Something pipeline. It has been so cool to see these leaders step up, run and lead and become national figures. Emily Randall out of Washington, one of my favorites, came through the Run for Something pipeline when she fought and won one of the most expensive state Senate races in the state of Washington that was extremely close, I think within a couple hundred votes when she was able to win it back in 2018. All that's to say that we have now elected nearly 1,500 millennials and Gen Z in nearly every state. We're just missing Idaho, which means there are Run for Something alum everywhere who are ready to move up and fill these higher offices, and they've got experience and skills. So if you, a viewer, wants to run for state or local office in 2025 or 2026, Run for Something would love to help you. You can go to runforwhat.net. You can enter your address. You can look up what offices are available to you this year or next if we've got that data yet. And we'll help you figure everything out from how to get on the ballot all the way through to Election Day. If you don't want to run just yet, but you want to help us, every dollar goes a long way. Runforsomething.net/donate is where you can go. $5, $500, I don't know, $5 million. We'll take whatever you can give.
Amanda, thanks so much for the work that you're doing. Again, as I mentioned before, it's especially important in kind of a political environment where it is so hard to have some type of bench because people do stay so long. So having you do the work that you do and getting these people into the pipeline, getting them acclimated to politics, I think is especially important right now. And I appreciate you taking the time today.
Thanks for getting the word out, Brian.